The night had folded itself into a quiet stillness, the kind of silence that felt almost sacred, as though the world had been draped in a velvet cloak of secrecy. It was just past midnight when the old clock in the hallway struck 12. Its chimes echoing softly through the corridors of the house like gentle reminders that time was still moving, even as everything else seemed suspended. The moon, full and luminous, hung high in the sky, casting a silver glow across the landscape, painting the trees, rooftops, and winding streets in ghostly light. Inside her room, Evelyn sat by the window, her fingers tracing lazy circles on the frosted glass as she gazed out at the world bathed in moonlight. She had always loved the midnight hour. To her, it was more than just the passing of time, it was a threshold. A doorway into moments when dreams felt closer, when secrets whispered louder, and when the heart often revealed truths it concealed in the brightness of day. Tonight, however, there was something different, something heavier in the air that pressed against her chest with unspoken anticipation. Her thoughts drifted between memory and imagination, the letter she had tucked away in her drawer, unopened yet burning with the weight of words unsaid. And the sound of footsteps she sometimes swore she heard in the hallway when no one else was awake. The house was not haunted, not in the literal sense, but it carried an atmosphere that reminded her of unfinished stories and voices left behind in forgotten rooms. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the chill seep into her skin. Somewhere outside, an owl called, its echoing hoot carried by the night breeze, and Evelyn's heart responded with a quickened beat, as if signaling that this hour would not pass like the others. Midnight, she thought, was not just a time, it was a promise, a mystery, and perhaps tonight, it was also an invitation. The sound of the owl's cry lingered in her ears, merging with the rustling of the leaves outside her window, until it became a rhythm that drew her deeper into thought. Evelyn rose from her chair, her white nightgown flowing around her ankles like mist trailing across the ground, and crossed the room toward the drawer where the letter lay hidden. She hesitated, her hand resting on the polished wood, her breath shallow with the weight of indecision. The letter had arrived 2 days earlier, its envelope sealed with the emblem she knew all too well, an insignia that once symbolized trust, love, and endless nights of whispered promises. But those days felt both near and impossibly distant, like echoes of a dream she could never quite hold on to. With trembling fingers, she slid the drawer open and retrieved the envelope, its paper faintly crinkled as though it had endured countless journeys before reaching her. She held it close to her chest, staring at it in the silver glow of the moonlight, her mind swimming with questions. What if it contained the apology she had yearned for? What if it bore the confession she feared? Or worse, what if it was nothing but silence wrapped in words, a final closure to something she wasn't ready to let go of? The clock chimed again, a single echo this time, sharp and delicate as glass breaking in slow motion. Evelyn inhaled deeply and tore the seal, unfolding the parchment with careful hands. The words blurred at first through the sheen of her tears, but as they sharpened into focus, her heart began to pound with both dread and hope. The letter spoke of midnight meetings, of a voice calling her back to where everything had once begun, under the old oak tree at the edge of town where lanterns once lit their path. He had written of regret, of longing, of promises that had been broken not by lack of love but by the cruel hands of circumstance. Every line was both a dagger and a balm, reminding her of the sweetness of their stolen moments and the bitterness of their abrupt parting. Evelyn's hands shook as she reached the final sentence, where he had written, "If your heart still remembers, meet me tonight at the hour when the world sleeps and only truth remains awake." Her eyes darted to the clock once more, it was only 15 minutes past midnight. The invitation, written with such urgency, felt like destiny pulling her into motion. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, her mind waging war between caution and desire. Each step down the hallway felt louder than thunder, though the house remained silent, the wooden floorboards creaking only faintly beneath her feet. Outside, the air was cool, the kind that carried with it the scent of damp earth and blooming night jasmine, intoxicating in its subtlety. The village beyond her home was quiet, its lamps extinguished, its windows shuttered, as though the world itself was keeping her secret. Evelyn's heart thudded with the awareness that she was walking not just into the night, but into the unknown. With every step closer to the old oak tree, she realized midnight was no longer a stillness, it was alive, humming with anticipation, whispering of answers waiting in the dark. The path to the old oak tree stretched like a ribbon of memory before Evelyn, every step pulling her deeper into the past she had tried so many times to bury. The night was alive in its own quiet way. Crickets sang softly from the grass, the leaves rustled with a hidden rhythm, and the stars above glimmered like watchful eyes. Her shawl clung tightly around her shoulders, though the chill that coursed through her body was less from the cold air and more from the anticipation that wrapped itself around her like an invisible cloak. She remembered the countless evenings she had once walked this path with him, their laughter weaving into the night air, their whispered dreams carried away by the breeze. Now, as she retraced those steps alone, her heart trembled at the thought of what or who she might find waiting beneath the oak. Would he be there, or was this all just an illusion crafted by her longing heart, a cruel trick of memory disguised as hope? When she reached the edge of the meadow, the silhouette of the oak rose before her, its branches outstretched like arms reaching for the heavens, its roots buried deep into the earth as though guarding secrets older than time. A lantern hung from one of its lower limbs, glowing faintly with a golden flame that flickered against the night. The sight made Evelyn's breath catch in her throat, for it was a sign, his sign, the same lantern they had once used to guide their way through midnight wanderings. She stepped closer, her footsteps muffled by the grass, her pulse pounding so loudly that it drowned out the quiet symphony of the night. As she approached, she saw a figure standing at the base of the tree, his back turned to her, his posture both familiar and foreign. His shoulders were broad yet carried a weariness that seemed etched by time, and though she couldn't yet see his face, she knew, her soul knew, that it was Adrian. For a long moment, Evelyn froze, torn between rushing forward and holding back. It had been years, years that had stretched like endless winters between them, filled with unanswered questions, lonely nights, and silent regrets. Yet here he was, the living embodiment of all she had yearned for, standing beneath the tree that had once been their sanctuary. Summoning the courage that trembled in her veins, she whispered his name, barely more than a breath, Adrian. The sound hung in the air, fragile as spider silk, yet powerful enough to make the figure turn. His face came into view, illuminated by the lantern's soft glow, older now, touched by shadows of sorrow, yet still carrying the same warmth in his eyes that had once made her believe in forever. "Evelyn," he said, his voice breaking the silence like a melody rediscovered, and in that moment, all the years between them seemed to collapse. Neither of them moved closer at first, both caught in the spell of recognition, of the unspoken weight that clung to the air. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions, to demand why he had left, why he had written now, why fate had been so merciless in keeping them apart. Yet when she opened her mouth, no words came, only tears that slid silently down her cheeks. Adrian took a tentative step forward, the light from the lantern catching the glint of sincerity in his gaze. "I didn't come here to explain," he admitted softly, "because no words could ever erase what was lost. I came to tell you, it was never by choice. And that every midnight since, I have lived with the absence of you." The honesty in his voice struck Evelyn like a chord, resonating through the hollow spaces of her heart. She stood there, torn between anger and forgiveness, between the weight of the past and the fragile hope of the present. Midnight, it seemed, was no longer silent, it pulsed with possibility, with the raw truth of hearts that had been waiting, aching, for this moment to arrive. For a moment that felt eternal, the silence between them was louder than any words they could have spoken. Evelyn's heart pounded like a drum, each beat echoing the war inside her, love colliding with betrayal, longing clashing with fear. She wanted to close the distance between them, to feel the warmth of his arms around her once again, yet she also wanted to turn and run, to protect the fragile shield she had built around herself over the years. Adrian's eyes searched hers, desperate and pleading, as though he were standing at the edge of a cliff and she alone held the power to either pull him back or let him fall. Finally, Evelyn inhaled sharply, her voice trembling as she broke the silence. "You left me," she whispered, the words escaping like a wound reopening, raw and bleeding. "You left without a word, without a reason. Do you know what that did to me?" Her hands tightened around the shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her knuckles pale in the lantern's glow. Adrian lowered his gaze, shame flickering across his features, but when he looked up again, his voice carried a depth of pain that mirrored her own. "I know," he said softly. "Every night, I've relived the moment I walked away. It wasn't by choice, Evelyn. Circumstances forced my hand, things I couldn't explain then without putting you in danger. I thought silence would protect you, but instead, it destroyed us both." His words hung heavy between them, and though part of her wanted to reject them, to cling to the anger that had sustained her through lonely years, another part, the part that had never stopped loving him, ached to believe. She turned her face away, gazing at the sky where the moon glowed in solemn witness, as if urging her to listen, to decide not with fear but with truth. The lantern flickered, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across Adrian's face, making him appear both familiar and foreign. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memories wash over her, their laughter echoing under these very branches, the way he used to hold her hand as though it were the only anchor he needed, the promises they whispered when the world was asleep. All of it had been shattered the night he vanished, leaving her with nothing but silence and questions. And yet, here he was, real, vulnerable, confessing words she had once prayed to hear. She felt the walls inside her begin to tremble, not fully collapsing, but weakening under the weight of love that had never truly died. "I wanted to hate you," she admitted, her voice quivering, breaking through the night air. "I told myself that if I ever saw you again, I would turn away, that I would never forgive. But standing here now, her eyes filled with tears, shimmering like stars in the lantern's glow. I don't know how to hate you, Adrian. I never did." The words cracked something open between them, and Adrian stepped closer, his movements slow, cautious, as though afraid a sudden motion would shatter the fragile thread connecting them. He reached out a hand, not to touch her, but to offer it an invitation, a plea. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she looked at his hand, trembling slightly in the cool night air, and then back to his eyes, which held both apology and hope. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, the storm of doubt raging inside her. Then, with a courage she didn't know she still possessed, she placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, a spark coursed through her veins, awakening memories, reigniting feelings she had tried to bury. The world seemed to hush around them, the crickets fell silent, the wind stilled, even the lantern flame burned steady as though midnight itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Under the ancient oak, with the moon as their witness, Evelyn and Adrian stood together once more, not as strangers reunited by chance, but as souls bound by love, pain, and the fragile hope of beginning again. Time seemed suspended beneath the oak tree, as though the universe itself had paused to witness the fragile reunion of two souls who had wandered too long apart. Evelyn felt the warmth of Adrian's hand steadying her trembling fingers, the connection both familiar and foreign, like rediscovering a melody she thought she had forgotten. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Their silence was not empty but filled with everything they had not been able to say for years, the grief, the longing, the love that had endured through absence. The lantern's glow cast a golden halo around them, blending with the silver light of the moon, as though day and night had briefly touched to bless this moment. Evelyn finally lifted her gaze, her eyes shimmering with tears that caught the moonlight like tiny stars. "What happens now?" she whispered, her voice delicate yet heavy with the weight of possibility. Adrian's expression softened, his lips curving into a smile that was both sad and hopeful. "Now," he replied quietly, "we decide if the past will chain us or if we'll dare to build something new from its ashes." His words struck her deeply, because she knew this night was more than a meeting, it was a crossroads. She thought of the nights she had spent alone, of the letters she had written and never sent, of the countless times she had sworn she would move on, only to find her heart wandering back to him in dreams. Part of her still feared the pain, the risk of giving him her trust again, but another part, the part that had come here tonight despite her doubts, yearned for healing, for a chance to rewrite the ending of their story. She searched his eyes, finding no deception there, only the raw honesty of a man who had been broken too, who had carried her memory like a lifeline through the years. The night deepened around them, the stars wheeling silently overhead as though urging her toward a choice. Evelyn stepped closer, closing the space between them until she could feel the warmth radiating from his chest. She placed her free hand lightly against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. It was the same rhythm she remembered, the same anchor that had once steadied her storms. "I don't know if I can forget," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But maybe it's not about forgetting. Maybe it's about forgiving." The words left her lips like a prayer, fragile but powerful, and in Adrian's eyes, she saw relief, gratitude, and love flicker like firelight. In that moment, the midnight air shifted, no longer heavy with uncertainty but humming with promise. Adrian pulled her gently into his embrace, his arms wrapping around her with a tenderness that spoke of both apology and devotion. Evelyn closed her eyes, resting her head against him, allowing herself to surrender to the truth she had carried all along, that love, no matter how battered by time and circumstance, was still alive between them. They stood like that beneath the oak, surrounded by the silence of the meadow and the blessing of the moon, two souls rediscovering the courage to love again. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt whole, as though the missing pieces of her heart had finally returned. When they finally pulled apart, Adrian lifted the lantern, its flame steady and bright, a symbol of the hope rekindled between them. "This light," he murmured, "isn't just for tonight. It's for every tomorrow we'll face together." Evelyn smiled, her tears now soft and cleansing rather than heavy with sorrow. She nodded, and with her hand still clasped firmly in his, they began to walk back along the path toward the village. The oak tree remained behind them, a guardian of secrets, a witness to love reborn under its ancient branches. As they disappeared into the night, the meadow seemed to sigh in contentment, the stars shimmering brighter, the moon beaming gently above. Midnight had not stolen their peace, it had given it back. And for Evelyn and Adrian, the hour that once symbolized loss had transformed into the promise of a new beginning.